So now, without further ado, we'll get started with the program tonight. We will be recording tonight, and that just got started. Our presenter will be Bryan Barth. So a little bit about Bryan. Bryan is an assistant district attorney in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. He graduated from Gettysburg in 2013 with a degree in political science, and then earned his law degree from Widener School of Law. During the pandemic, he parlayed his interest in wine to official certification as a sommelier, and tonight will share his vast knowledge with us, based in part on what he learned through that process. So if you could please join me in offering virtual applause to Bryan Barth.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and hello, everybody. Happy Wine Monday. I'm glad to see everybody turning out. I know it's tough to do this on a Monday. We're first full week back for a lot of people, I think, after the holidays and the short weeks and the snow that at least we got down here. So thank you all for being here. I'm Bryan Barth, class of 13, and I'm just now realizing I guess I'm not technically bold anymore with the turn of the calendar.
Oh my God, everyone's got their...
Yikes. Don't like that. And I'm an attorney and a level 3 sommelier. I am certified through it's now the National Wine School. At the time was the Philadelphia Wine School. They use the same criteria as what people call the WSET, wine and spirits exam. What that entailed was 8 weeks of class, 4 hours a day after work. So it was a lot learning the history of the grapes themselves, wine regions, wine making, wine labeling, and wine tasting. And it ended with we had a written exam and then a blind tasting of 6 different wines. So the goal tonight is to be able to make wine more accessible and more fun for everybody. So when you go to the liquor store, you know what you're drinking and you know what you're going to enjoy. So you're not just dropping money for no reason. I picked wines that tonight should be mostly, readily available for people. Being in Pennsylvania, I probably have the smallest access to wine, although I'm right near Delaware, so that helps. If you don't have the exact wines that were on the list, that's totally fine, because what we're going to be focusing on today isn't the wines themselves, but rather the process, what goes into a wine, what you should be looking for, reading labels, price points, and then how to taste your wine, how to smell your wine, things like that. So hopefully by the end of the session, everyone can confidently walk into the wine store, liquor store, the state-controlled store that we have here, and pick out a bottle of wine that you're going to take home and enjoy. So first things first, wine is divided into a lot of different ways. So when you walk into a store, I was talking with Joe. He said his dad was an associate at Total Wine in Delaware, which is, an absolutely enormous store and can be very intimidating. You see some, aisles that are labeled by the grape, some that are labeled by the region, and that can be very confusing at first. So generally in wine, we divide first and foremost into Old World and New World. Old World being countries that have at least 300 years of winemaking in them, pretty much Europe at this point, Italy, France, Spain, Greece, all of those countries, and New World being United States, South America, and South Africa primarily. There's always going to be a few up-and-coming wine regions that we'll talk about at the end too that have a lot of fun stuff going on. The funny thing is, in a couple hundred years ago in Europe, they were struck by a parasite in their soil called phylloxera that ate essentially all of the wine, the rootstock, the roots of the vines, particularly in France. France lost about 99% of their rootstock. For some reason, phylloxera doesn't really survive in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in South America. So Argentine and Chilean and Uruguayan winemakers don't have to worry about this. So for Europe to recover, they actually had to bring rootstock back from the New World to the Old World. So 99% of French wine is actually grown on roots that come from the Western Hemisphere. And the French are very reluctant to talk about that because of their, they are the kings of wine. So that's the first way to divide it. So In the New World, we always talk about wine by the grape. So, and sorry, Australia, New Zealand, also New World. That's huge region that I missed there. So we'll always say, oh, we're having a Cab Sav, Sauv Blanc, Pinot Noir. Whereas in Europe, they like to call their wines by the region. Are we having Burgundy or Bordeaux or Brunello or Rioja? So in the liquor store, it's often divided into those terms. So you can be in the Pinot Noir section looking at Pinot Noir, but there's also going to be Pinot Noirs in other sections based on where they're located in Europe. The biggest one in that being Burgundy. So if you hear someone say, oh, I love Burgundy, red Burgundy, they're talking about Pinot Noir almost exclusively. There's going to be a couple different little changes here and there, some up and coming wineries that are doing different grapes in that region. But to get certified as a real Burgundy wine, if it's red, it's Pinot Noir. If it's white, it's Chardonnay. So a lot of people, they say like, oh, I don't drink Chardonnay. I only drink white Burgundy. It's because they taste very different because of the way they're made, different processes, but the same grape. Same thing with Bordeaux. Bordeaux is always going to be generally a mix of Cab Sav and Merlot. You can also use other wines to smooth it out, Petit Verdot, Malbec, things like Cab Franc. But it's always going to be Merlot and Cab Sav is the big parts there. So people say, oh, I don't like Merlot, but they drink, Chateau Rothschild, which is 75% Merlot. They just don't know it because the label doesn't say it. If you've ever seen the movie Sideways, that's the big joke in it, that Paul Giamatti, he says, I didn't come this far to drink fucking Merlot. And then his, big wine at the end is the Lafite Rothschild, which is predominantly Merlot that he ends up drinking at like an In-N-Out or Burger King out there out of a paper cup. So that's always a fun joke. And that movie actually completely tanked Merlot sales in the United States and made Pinot Noir explode. It's like it ended up being, people think, a $2 billion swing since, I guess, what was that, 2003 when that came out. So some people's lives were ruined by that. Some people's lives were made by one line in a movie with Paul Giamatti. So, when you're looking at a label, that's kind of, the first thing you look at. Does it, if it says, for this one, for the Sauvignon Blanc, has it right on there, Sauvignon Blanc, New Zealand. Okay, that's a New World. But if you see a region and you're not sure, like I said, certain regions are always maybe one thing, Rioja, Tempranillo, Burgundy, Pinot Noir. But just ask a person in a wine store, an associate, because especially as the climate's changing, a lot of these wines are changing. 15 years ago, you would only have found Riesling and Cabernet Franc in the Finger Lakes. Now they're making excellent Pinot Noirs that I think hold up with anything from Central Coast California and even Burgundy, because the climate has become much more akin to Germany, Austria than New York. So we're, keeping an eye on things. A lot of Napa places are planting Spanish grapes now. They're doing better in that weather than Cab Sav, and they're also more resistant to outside environmental factors like forest fire smoke. Napa got crushed with all those forest fires the past few years and the earthquakes. Now they're selling those wines as like novelties to people to get back on their feet, but the people who are buying them are collectors, not drinkers of it. The smoke taint is a very real thing. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, with when you're looking at a label, you want to look at the region, the states. Generally, the smaller the region, I wouldn't say the better the wine is going to be, but the more artisanal it's going to be. So if you see a wine bottle that just says California on it, that's generally going to be a bigger manufacturer. It means they're taking grapes from more than one region. Every wine region is divided into AVAs here in America, which is American viticultural area. Same thing like DOCG in Italy and AOC in France. In France, it's Appellation Origin Contrôlée. All those little towns and areas have specific rules about how you grow your grapes, what kind of pesticides you can use, how you can irrigate your vineyards, and then how long you can store your wine before it's bottled, things like that. So if you see a big area like California, that means they're not following the laws of a particular area, sourcing their grapes from all over. If you see Napa, then that's even smaller, going to be a little more focused. And if you see, Stag's Leap AVA of Napa, that's going to be even smaller. That's going to be a bottle that's probably all the grapes are from one single plot, maybe the size of, your backyard even, and they're going into that bottle. There might only be, less than 400 bottles of that wine in existence. So generally what we're looking at in labels is the smaller the region listed, the more personable that wine's going to be, the more the winemaker has a say in how that's going to turn out, because they're controlling a lot more aspects, from the immediate growth, how they're planting, to how vines are being trimmed, how much sun they're getting, when they're being picked, and how long that wine's going to age, how much, if they need to add anything at all. Champagne's usually going to have sugar added to it after it's fermented. And that depends on each individual maker. They'll take a taste and say, oh, no, it needs 500 grams more sugar in another year, and we'll see where it's at then. So with that being said, I think we can delve into the stars of the show. So what I did today was, like I said, easy wines that I thought, most people can get. We're doing 2 whites, 2 reds, a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, which is a wine in its own, really. New Zealand Sauv, it's in its own world. There's Sauvignon Blanc from everywhere, but this is one that you're going to see in the most places, has a lot of versatility with food, things like that. Then we're going to move into a dry Riesling. And if you couldn't find a dry Riesling, any one will work. Well, I could talk about Riesling for hours on end. It's a lot of sommeliers' favorite grape because you can do a lot with it. I get really excited for Riesling. And then we'll move into a Pinot Noir from California and a Cab Sauv from California. I picked Josh because that's like the biggest one, that's the most accessible. And now I'm seeing memes all over. Don't know where they came from or how it started, but I'm going to figure it out. And side note, if you're on Instagram and you want to follow for more wine, tips, advice, fun facts, I do run a wine Instagram account called Bottles with Barry. Barry's a nickname I've developed over the years, kind of hide the real persona. So on that I usually do wine reviews on Wednesdays, and I try to do budget related wines, because when you look at the Winestagram, wine Twitter, it's all these people trying $100 Bordeauxs and $1,000 Bordeauxs, and it's completely inaccessible and it's no fun for anyone. So I like to get to the bottom of it. Rosé in a can. Hey, let's try it. See what's up. Wine's supposed to be fun and you're supposed to enjoy it. It's not supposed to be good because someone told you. If you like Yellowtail, you like Yellowtail. Drink Yellowtail. If you like the fancier stuff and that's in your budget, you can do that. But there's a wine for everybody out there, no matter what your budget is. Just got to find it. So starting off with the New Zealand Sauv Blanc, I put Kim Crawford on the list. I actually picked up a Starborough. The snowstorm hit us pretty hard here at our state store, so pickings were slim, to say the least. And they were out of Kim Crawford. So New Zealand Sauv Blancs are, they're not the most popular wine in America, but it's consumed in the most volume. It's not sold the most, but it's consumed the most. And a lot of people say it is a mom wine. It's popular amongst your average ordinary people, and it's got a very unique taste. So I'm just going to walk through. We're just going to do before we get into this bottle in particular, we're going to do how we taste wine. So I have these little pour tops, and they're great. They're like 99 cents. They're always at the checkout in any wine store. And I use them for just the ease of pouring. And it also has a little catch for sediment. All the things you see about like the sulfite filters and hyper decanting tops and all, for the most part, aren't going to really do anything. If you're drinking super old bottles of wine, like 30-year-old cabs, then it actually might have a tangible effect for you. But for your everyday wines, all those little tricks and wands and all that are mostly psychological, or they look cool. So I just like to use these because it helps me pour just a little bit at a time and I'm not sloshing all over the place. So, and I use just a standard universal wine glass. Different glasses can do different things, but if you have these ones, they're often called Pinot Noir glasses. You can drink any kind of wine out of them and it's going to be totally fine. So there's 5 S's in wine tasting in the beginning: see, swirl, sniff, sip, and savor. So We'll go through this one by one. So first we want to see the wine. We're going to hold it up and take a look at it. You generally want to have something, if you can have a white background for it, like a wall, or take like an index card and look at it like that. You can use your hand even, that's good. But this should have generally like, a fancy person would call it light pale straw, something like that. Just the lighter yellow side. We don't need to get, into the whole color wheel here with Pantones. So, it's not quite golden. It's like a pale yellow. And I like my Sauv Blancs very cold too. I never do ice in my wine, but I like to keep it in the fridge for probably longer than some people do, because it's what I like. And frankly, a wine like this, it's not going to have the temperature, unless you leave it in your car in the summer, it's not going to be, or it freezes, isn't going to be too affected by it. So if you like it cold, drink it cold. Now we're going to do a swirl. So I like to put mine on the table because it's harder to spill, and just give it a couple hearty swirls. That's just going to put some oxygen in the wine, release some of the aromas. Then we move on to the sniff. And this is the fun part. Do not be afraid to get your whole face in there. That's it. I like to do one smell with my mouth closed and then one with my mouth open. So I'll go. Do another little swirl. Okay, so the smell. So what I'm getting right away is that tropical fruit smell. When we break down smells and flavors, we're going to follow another little acronym here. FEW. Fruit, earth, and wood. So you're looking for your fruit flavors first, your earthy flavors secondary, and then any kind of wood, which would be oak or anything like that, how it's stored on the back end. Now, a wine like this is going to be almost entirely fruit. There's really no earth or wood smells on it. And the fruits I get are like tropical based fruit, like passion fruit, grapefruit. It's a little lemony too, but not as lemony as a Riesling is going to be. It's more that, star fruit, something along those lines. If you watch the movie Somm, which is about the guys taking the master sommelier exam, they come up with all kinds of great freshly opened tennis ball smell and garden hose. They only do that to try to stand out from the crowd, really. Any wine textbook or class you go to is going to keep it to pretty much tropical fruit, citrus fruit, red fruit, black fruit, and then same with your wood smells. You can break it down farther from there, but at that point, it's going to be everybody's nose is different, right? We're not trained police dogs looking for one specific scent somewhere. Everybody's going to have a different palate, different nose, different life experiences, know what different things smell like. So you just do what you roll with what you got. So, excuse me, my dog has joined the chat. Yeah. So now we're going to sip. And when you sip, I like to put a little bit of wine in my mouth, and then I work it around my mouth a little bit, make sure I hit all my taste buds, and then swallow it. So it sounds disgusting when I do it, but this is how I do it. And then down. And on this, I think the mouth matches the nose to an extent, but I think it's a little more tart. I think it doesn't smell very tart, but it tastes a little bit tart. And then that last S, savor, is just how it goes down. Did you have that like a pucker from it? Was it smooth in your mouth? Some newer red wines will feel real grippy and dry your mouth out. That's from tannins. We'll get into that in a little bit. But the mouthfeel is always something you want to consider when you're tasting wine. So obviously this one is classic, from Marlborough, New Zealand, which is the top of the South Island. That's where 80% of New Zealand's wines come from. It's almost all Sauvignon Blanc there. And when I'm looking for a Sauvignon Blanc, I never want to spend more than $15 on that. There are some ones that are better, better, smaller produced. I was actually a ambassador for Cloudy Bay, which is like a famous one, and they're up to now charging like $32 a bottle, and that's just not what the product is worth compared to this. You're not going to find that much of a difference between. It's not twice as good. Sauvignon Blanc from that area can only change so much. It doesn't really age. It goes with pretty much any kind of food you want to eat with it, especially summertime stuff, very refreshing. So usually if you want to top it for like $15 a bottle for a Sauv Blanc, maybe closer to 20. Prices have gone up for it because during COVID, New Zealand was entirely shut down. So they lost an entire year's harvest. So they're still kind of making that back up on, by having to raise their prices. So that's just something, that's not anything really anybody can control. They're working back on that, but you're going to, in that $15 to $17 range, you can find a really good Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand. Now, Sauvignon Blancs from Oyster Bay, very good. Sorry, there was a question there. How about Oyster Bay and Noblio? I've never really had Noblio. I've a couple times at parties, but I generally try to stick with either Oyster Bay, Starborough, or the Kim Crawford. I think those ones are all very good. Cloudy Bay is they were very good. It's just it's hard to justify spending. I think I saw the other day for like $32.99 for a bottle of their stuff. It's really not an every night bottle at that point, at least for me. So, excuse me, Marla. So, anybody have any other? Let me just check the questions. Yes, you do need to know the acronyms for the final, Joe. There is a test at the end of this, everybody. So make sure you're paying close attention, and it will be sent to all your old advisors so they can continue to haunt you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I drink a lot of Sauvignon Blanc, so I was laughing when you called it a mom wine. But I like it because it is so versatile.
I said that because I ordered a glass the other night when we were at dinner like 2 weeks ago, and that's what there was like a 19-year-old waitress, and she was like, "Oh, that's my mom's wine," and I was like,
"Yeah,
okay."
Well, it really is. It's kind of perfect all around. I feel like I could drink it all the time, but I do the Starborough. When you picked up the Starborough, that's one that I get a lot, and also the Oyster Bay. A lot of times they are from New Zealand, but I've also had some from Chilean. Is there a certain region that normally Sauvignon Blancs are the best from, or in your opinion, are the best from?
Yeah, I think Marlborough probably has the best, at least right now, climate for it. Just based on, it's like never really gets too hot or too cold. They have the sea right there, so they get good wind to keep the vines clear. But South America is starting to do some. Like, is it Chile? France, the Loire Valley is like famous for French Sauvignon Blanc. They do Sauvignon Blanc as their white and Cabernet Franc as their red, but it's a completely different flavor profile there. It's more of a, it's less fruity, more citrusy rather than tropical, and zippy, very acidic. But that also goes good with food. I don't really like Northeast American Sauv Blanc. A lot of wineries, I think, offer it because people like it. It's too humid, I think, here, especially in Pennsylvania, to get the grapes get engorged, so they don't really retain the flavor. They get way too waterlogged. You don't really want, you think Pennsylvania, oh, we can grow great crops here, but grapes are very different. The harder they, work, the more they have to work for it, the better the fruit is going to be. So, grapes don't really do well in fertile regions because they retain too much water to be flavorful. So I don't like the ones from around here as much. I think people are trying them. I think we would do better with like Chenin Blanc, has a little less flavor, to lose. But I think if I were to, I always buy the New Zealand Sauv when I get it, or sometimes I get a Loire Valley one, Loire Valley for the Francophiles out there. But I think anywhere, South America is doing they're not just Malbec anymore. There's Sauv Blanc, there's Riesling Pinot Noir in Patagonia, which is phenomenal, and they're trying to make a comeback from a grape called Tannat, which is kind of like a Malbec, but a little different. So it's definitely an up and coming region for that. I think, depending on where you're at elevation wise and to the sea, could be in a pretty similar climate for that.
Just to follow up with that, I know what the dry Riesling that I'm in Maine, and I was laughing when you said that Pennsylvania is one of the hardest places. It's not. Maine is. One of them I couldn't even get here. I can't remember which one it was. They don't even sell it in Maine. And so the dry Riesling, the Chateau Saint Michel, I could find sweet Riesling. I could get their standard Riesling, but I couldn't get the dry Riesling. So I ended up, you stated about the Finger Lakes region. And so I was talking to the person in the wine shop that I was in, who suggested this one as well. And he was interested because you had, the Chateau Saint Michel is in Washington.
Yeah.
But yet you recommended the Finger Lakes.
That is, so I go to the Finger Lakes every year. That's like my favorite spot to go to. So I picked the Washington, the Saint Michel one, not so much based on similar climate, but more so for availability.
That's what I figured.
I'd seen it a lot of places.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the Columbia Valley in Washington is like a desert, essentially. I think it's technically is a desert based on precipitation and the diurnal change in temperature from night and day. So you do get the Finger Lakes does get that temperature change where it can be hot during the day and then get really cold at night, and long winters. So there's a little similarities there, but that was an availability pick, that one. So any other Sauv Blanc questions?
There was a question in the chat, Brian, about what you would recommend as a food pairing with this wine.
I think there's a lot of different things you can do with any kind of fresh seafood. Like you have your scallops with butter, things like that. Richer, summer foods like that would be great. Not like barbecue chicken isn't like barbecue sauce, but like grilled chicken, with vegetables on the grill, like things that could have like a char with it that kind of offset. But with Sauv Blanc, definitely nothing like a you don't want like something like a steak or dark red meats, but anything you can think of, like we're having a nice light meal, a salad, even like a salad with fresh vegetables and grilled chicken can make a great pair with things like that. I'd say it pairs more with like standard everyday foods that you would have for lunch or dinner than like if you're going to make a big complicated meal out of it. All right, I will move on to the Riesling now. So Riesling is a grape that gets a bad rap overall, I think, with people. People immediately hear Riesling and they think like, oh, that's sweet, I don't like it. And that's because a lot of the mass market Rieslings are very sweet. They're very sugary. And if you don't like that, then you really have to enjoy sweet wine to enjoy those Rieslings. But true Riesling, the way it's intended to be, is going to be, depending on what region you're in, either dry or bone dry. In the US, that's how we go. We go dry, bone dry. In Germany, it's called Trocken Riesling. France and Alsace, they have it, their own scale for it. And that's, the big regions you're going to see it from. You're going to see Riesling is probably the most popular German wine. Germans produce a ton of Riesling, drink a ton of Riesling. Austria is in that as well. And then the Alsace region of France is all Riesling and Pinot Noir. That's what they do pretty much exclusively there. And then the Finger Lakes, and now Washington State's getting into it, but the Finger Lakes, I think, is the best place. I like Finger Lakes Rieslings better than German and Alsatian Rieslings because there's a whole new generation of winemakers there that are making these really dry, really zippy, acidic Rieslings that, you can eat with literally anything. That Riesling is like the one thing that I think, because of the acidity, you can kind of, whatever meal you're having, you can make it work with. It doesn't have to be like a specific thing. But it's evolved a lot as a grape over the years. And it's one of the few white wines with real aging potential. So you can have Riesling when it's made, you can drink it right then and there. You can get last year's vintage being a year it's produced, and drink it, and it's going to be fresh and crisp and great. or you could cellar it for 10 or 15 years, and the taste profile will change a lot, but it'll still be really good. It's white wine doesn't usually have aging potential, but Riesling does. So, a lot of people say, this is a white wine where you're going to get a little more of that minerality with the fruit. So people say, it tastes like it has a slate or crushed stone kind of profile to it, or even chalky. Some people say, because, once you get past that initial, lemony pear kind of taste, it does feel like, oh yeah, this is actually, I can see where you say slate from. It doesn't make sense when you read it, but then you actually taste it and you're like, okay. So let's give ours, let's do our 5 S's. So we're going to see, swirl, sniff, sip, and savor. Now, I think you'll probably notice immediately that it is more acidic and tart than the Sauvignon Blanc. So you're going to have more citrusy, lemon, lime, pear kind of fruit on the front. And, you get that a little bit of that minerality, that chalky slateness that kind of balances it out and makes it really like zip down. And it doesn't have the same, it doesn't go down the same as the Sauv Blanc. It's going to be a little more straight down. If you have a sweeter Riesling, that's going to be a little different, obviously. Going to be more sugary, a little more viscous going down. But the dry Rieslings are be good. And as Riesling gets older, it gets more golden in its color too. Things break down in the wine that change the structure of it, so it gets more golden. And again, this is something that you can drink on its own. I like Riesling is kind of has always been known to be the wine you can bring to dinner because there's not really a dish that goes bad with it. But a lot of somms like to drink it on its own because a lot of when you're working in a restaurant or in the wine trade, you're drinking a lot of heavy reds because that's what people drink. That's what you need to stock your shelves with. So you're always doing like heavy red, full bodied red. So then you get off work and it's like, well, I just want something nice and light. And the winemaker can make Riesling very different depending on what they want to do. Do they want to put it in barrels? Do they want to put it in stainless steel, kind of like Chardonnay, right? Do they want to age it? Do they want to release it right away? So the winemaker, depending on, were there grapes in a flat field or were they on a hill? Were they near, were they on Lake Seneca and the Finger Lakes, or were they back a little bit? All those little things can change it, and they could take a little bit from one part of their vineyard, a little bit from the other, and blend it together. Sometimes you can even get like a creamier taste on the back end, depending on how, the age of it, if you're in like the second and third year Riesling. So it's a wine you can do a lot with, and it's definitely getting a lot more popular than it used to be. There used to not even really be dry Rieslings in the store. It was like the Red Cat you'd see sometimes in there, Hazelnut Red Cat, and it's like 5 grams of sugar per liter, which is like an astounding amount of sugar. A dry Riesling is usually going to have 0.5 grams per liter. So that's a difference with those. And a lot of them on the back will have like a scale. It's not always, but a lot of the American ones, especially on the back from dry to sweet, and like with a sliding scale, and they'll just mark it on where it's at. So one of the big Dr. Constantine Frank in the Finger Lakes is they have their regular, and then they have like semi-dry, sweet, semi-sweet, and it goes up and up, and they just like put on the back little tick marks where you're at. Riesling also can turn into ice wine, which is when you allow the grapes to freeze on the vine. And it's like a really sweet, really viscous dessert wine. It's super high in alcohol, but it's like champagne in a way. So, champagne has to come from the Champagne region of France. Otherwise, it's sparkling wine. Ice wine has to be frozen to a certain point. Otherwise, it's late harvest Riesling. So some places don't get cold enough for the grapes to fully freeze. So that makes late harvest Riesling, which is going to be less alcohol, less sweet, less viscous. True ice wine is going to be like almost like syrup, and it's almost like Sauternes wine, like dessert Bordeaux. If anyone's ever come across that, it's astoundingly expensive and doesn't taste very good, but it's like a status thing. But ice wine it's a lot of fun. It usually comes in really small bottles because for a winemaker to just say, oh yeah, we're going to allow our grapes to freeze on the wine and hope that it develops what we call botrytis, which is like a fungus on it, and then that freezes in there and gives it a funky flavor. You're like gambling, your livelihood really. So it takes a really experienced winemaker with a lot of acreage that can afford to try to do that. A lot of it comes from Niagara, actually. Like up in the Niagara wine region, Erie, Canada, Buffalo area, which is another up and coming. Oh, Colleen, I did not know you lived in the Finger Lakes. I know when me and my wife went there the first time, we had one of her 80 pies also sent us a bunch of, it was like her great grand little ×5 that had worked and lived there and sent us all the good recs to go to. So that was fun. And it's a great place to visit too, Finger Lakes. I mean, you can do, depending on what season you go, there's a lot of different stuff to do. You can snowmobile in the winter, you can kayak in the summer, hike in the state park at Watkins Glen, and then do wineries and breweries the rest of the day. So they've really put the Finger Lakes up, or put the Riesling on the map back, for sure. I think German Riesling is inaccessible for a lot of people just because the names on it are so long of these compound words that people see and they're like, oh, I'm not trying. I don't know what that is. I mean, that was like the hardest part of the wine test is the German wines for sure. And I took German at Gettysburg, so I'm still navigating that. So any Riesling questions? Also, I have on my shirt, this is my logo from Instagram, chill your whites, decant your reds. Just a little reminder, you don't always have to decant your reds, but always chill your whites. White wine is, the way it is produced and everything is really meant to be chilled to really maximize the flavor. Doesn't have to be cold, but you want it to be on the chillier side, especially because once you take it out of the fridge, you don't want to put it back and have to run back and forth for every glass. So if you keep it a little colder, then as it gains a little temperature, it's going to change the flavor profile a little bit too. Like sometimes I put a Pinot really cold in the fridge and I pull it out just so I can taste the difference of when it's like cold to room temperature. So, I'm sorry, folks. I forgot one of my first points. Screw top versus bottle, versus cork. I mean, what do we think is better for the wine?
My husband just said screw top, and I think it's because then he doesn't have to help me open it.
He would be correct. So screw tops are actually called Stelvin enclosures. Yes, exactly. Oxygen cannot get into wine. So with cork, about 2% of wine is going to get corked, which means it gets oxidized and it'll taste like wet newspaper or like mold. It'll completely ruin a bottle. And for someone from Australia who is shipping all their wine over at an astounding shipping cost, they cannot afford to lose 2% of their product. They also can't afford to buy all that cork and have it shipped there because there's no natural cork in Australia. So cork, all it does is add cost to your bottle. And the only reason people in the old world still use it is because it's simply a status thing, or they want to put their little logo on it so it looks cool. The Stelvin enclosure, the screw top, is always going to be better for the wine, but there's an aversion to it because people assume it's cheap, and that's a stereotype trying to get past. The wine world's coming around a lot on sustainability between the enclosures and using less glass per bottle. A lot of wines that you used to see would have that really thick glass with like a logo printed in it and stuff aren't doing that anymore. They're using thinner glass and reusable glass. It probably has a little bit to do with their bottom line. That stuff is not as cheap as it used to be, and they can just say it's for sustainability. But even if it's for that, it's still helping out in the long term. Winemakers kind of have a collective interest in keeping the environment good for them because they rely on it. Finger Lakes last year, I'm a member at Forge Wine Club in the Finger Lakes. They don't have any reds this year because they lost their entire crop of red to a late frost. And you'll see them in France, especially, and some people in the Finger Lakes do this. They will put out buckets of, oil, like big candles, in between all the vines and light them on fire. And it looks like the hills are on fire because they're just trying to stave the frost away. And that's really the only good way to do it. Some people can cover them up, but that's the old fashioned way. They just put out these giant tubs of like petroleum. And it looks like the whole mountain's on fire. It's crazy. But one of the best vineyards in the Finger Lakes is not doing any red wine this year. And it's a shame because they had really good Cab Franc and Pinot Noir. So they're down to just Riesling. It's probably, they're going to need like 3 good harvests to make up for that loss. So environmental factor is always a thing. Like I said, frost up here, wildfires and earthquakes in California. Texas had some wildfire. Texas is becoming a burgeoning wine region. They had feral pigs in Texas, feral hogs, huge problem. Apparently they have a big affinity for grapes and vines and they're just tearing things up down there. And Arkansas too with feral hogs. Arkansas is becoming a wine area. It has that those areas where it's like a little elevated. They have a good temperature right there, but they have a razorback problem down there. So every wine region has its little quirks and things. In the Finger Lakes, they keep some places have like cannons or big boom boxes at the end of their vines, and they'll set them off once a day to scare all the birds away when the birds are eating the grapes. And turkeys. Turkeys are a terrible parasite for wine. So we will move on from Riesling to the Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir, probably, one of the more famous grapes. Pinot is the dominant grape in Burgundy. In the history of wine, Pinot plays more of a role even than Bordeaux and, Sherry, Madeira. The old Burgundian kings have been working with this for a while. You get it in Burgundy. In Beaujolais, they have Gamay and Pinot Noir. And most of California, besides Napa, is doing awesome Pinot Noirs. And now we have them up in New York. I think the cool climate Pinots are just outstanding. And of course, the Willamette Valley in Oregon, which is, I think, if you were to ask me my favorite wine to drink, it changes week to week, whatever I'm in the mood for usually. But I'm often going to say a Finger Lakes Riesling as a white and a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, specifically from the Eola Eminent Hills, because there's a complexness there to it that I think is really fun. But we can talk about my favorites a different day. So we had the J. Wilkes listed, which is a fantastic one. I actually picked up a La Crema because I saw it. It was on a great sale. La Crema is a fantastic winemaking organization. They do a lot of different wines. They have their standard Pinot, and they have a lot of single block Pinots that are different and really good. They take care of their employees very well. They allow people within the company to kind of contribute to how they're making their wine, and they're really up with the trends. So, when I saw it on sale, I was like, well, I gotta jump into this one now. I actually know my old colleague of mine, old trial partner, was a member at La Crema, and I used to love when he would get the shipments in because it meant we could get together after work and drink them together. Oh, so you have a great wine shop employee then that you got. So, and this is this La Crema I have is from Monterey. They have wines, they do it all over California. They're big enough that they can kind of bring things in from a bunch of different places and tinker around with it to make different tastes and flavors. They have a lot of single block places too. Single block just means within the vineyards are divided into one side of the street and the other side of the street, or this hill and this flat part. A block is just a specific part where the soil and climate's pretty standard. You might have clay on one side of the vineyard and shale on the other. So single block is just all grapes of the same manner. And this La Crema is certified sustainable too. So that's a big thing now. We have biodynamic and organic, and sustainable, and they all mean different things, and they all mean different things in different states and different countries. So biodynamic in Oregon isn't the same as California or New York or French and American. So every locale has their own rules for what that's going to be. So I also pour into the same glass. When I do this, whenever you're going upward, it's okay to do that. So if you're going from white to lighter bodied red to fuller bodied reds, you don't need to change your glass. You don't want to rinse it out with water, actually. And sorry, my accent with the water is probably driving people nuts. When I was in the wine school, when we would change wines, we would actually use Pinot Grigio to clean our glasses. The teacher would just pour a little Pinot Grigio in there. You swirl it around, take it down, because if you put water in, it can affect the acidity that's already established in the glass. So at least that's what he told us. I don't know if there's a chemical thing behind that. I think Mrs. Zaleski can help us with that. But that's what we were told. So we go, as long as you're going up, it's good to use the same glass. So Pinot is going to be, one of your lighter bodied reds. Very delicate grape, very hard to grow. It is affected by a lot of different things, weather and sun, wind, even. It's a, as Paul Giamatti says in Sideways, she's a finicky bitch, but that's what makes it such good wine in the end. If you can master Pinot Noir, you can master anything, really. So if you take a look, if you do the C, it's gonna be a little lighter in that, red, maybe turn purpley kind of region, but not dark like a cab. Give it a swirl. Oh, something about Pinot. And now, so I like the Oregon Pinot Noir, specifically from the Willamette Valley. I'll type it in just a second. I think this is, oh man. So you get a bit of that like cherry, strawberry, like the brighter red fruits. But then also there's like a creaminess to it that I don't almost describe as like cherry cola or Dr. Pepper kind of to it. And that's when when I get that, that's when I know I'm getting a good Pinot. That and what some people would say is barnyard, which is more of a composty kind of smell, can be very indicative of a good Pinot. It sounds weird to say, I know, like they like barnyard, like poop, but I mean it's a sign of a good Pinot. But this is just, yeah, you can even get some forest floor in there, which is a pretentious thing to say, but like it smells like if you were like having to walk down like an autumn trail, the leaves are falling, you're just enjoying everything. That's what I think this wine smells like.
Bryan, you've got one question here about your favorite Pinot region.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I like to do, when I do tastings, when I host tastings, I like to use examples like that. Like, right, what does this wine taste like? Okay, it tastes like fruit, earth, and wood. What does it really taste like? Does it taste like you're sitting on the beach in the summer, having a good time? You got no work for a week and your phone's off. Does it taste like, Friday night in watching a movie? Wine can, if you're having fun with it, it's a mindset, it's a vibe. Have fun with it. Don't be, really married to getting the flavors right. Because again, everyone tastes something different. Everyone has a different palate, different experiences. So there. I see we're getting toward the hour mark, so I'll start moving a little quicker. I just get very excited when I'm talking wine. But yeah, does anybody else get that, like that, what I said, like cherry cola or vanilla, Dr. Pepper kind of thing going on? Amy, I see you shaking your head.
Yes, I'm one of those that whenever I do wine tastings, I don't usually pick out the flavors myself, but as soon as you mention them, then all of a sudden it's like, yes, and as soon as you mention the cherry coke or the Dr. that instantly hit me that's what I was getting.
And that's how it's very psychological. I hate to say it as someone with a certification in wine that some of it can just be, I'm blanking. People can put the idea in your head. The first day of wine class, we were given a red wine and told to guess what wine it was. And everyone was like, this is a Pinot, this is a Cab, this is a Chianti. It was Chardonnay that was dyed with red grape must, and no one was even close. And the grape must adds no flavor. It was literally just like dry grape skin that the teacher, stirred in, and was like, yeah, see, this is why you need all five. This is why you have to see it, swirl it, sniff it, sip it, savor it. Because we were just seeing it, and that immediately like took over as the first thing. Like, all right, well, now cut it in half. Now we're just in the red world. No, you got to take it all together. I thought that was such a dirty trick, but it was so funny. Like, you had people like, oh, I would never get this wrong. This is clearly a Chianti. I'm Tuscan by nature, so I know my Chianti. And he's like, actually, it's Chardonnay from, it's like barefoot Chardonnay that I dyed. So, Pinots, you're going to want to see, again, Alsace has Pinot. Germany has great Pinots, Finger Lakes, Central California, Paso Robles, all those areas, Monterey, even down into Santa Barbara now has, I get a little confused with California going down the coast, but that's like that whole area has got great Pinot, and Oregon is going to be what I think is the gold standard, at least for the U.S. Burgundy, of course, the French will tell you the only good Pinot Noir is from Burgundy. Burgundy is fantastic. It's a little earthier, a little more tannic, I think, usually. It has more aging potential, but when you drink it young, you get that grippy tannins, whereas U.S. Pinot, I think, is a lot more smooth and a lot more conducive to just sipping, talking, drinking, enjoying. It pairs great with food, but I think it's best enjoyed, amongst friends, sharing and telling stories. Now, on to the most widely consumed wine in the United States, Cabernet Sauvignon. And I don't know, I think Josh might be the highest seller now. It was Meiomi for a while. We had Mondavi for a while. I think Josh now takes the cake. I'll have to double check on that. But obviously, a lot of these California vineyards, the big ones, are all owned by like the same people. Mondavi owns a good amount of vineyards not named Mondavi now. And it's actually not the original. The Mondavi family is split into two factions now. So there's the original Robert Mondavi family. They've sold off almost all of their holdings to different producers. I think Meiomi actually and Gallo bought them out. Gallo, the big jugs of cheap wine, bought out that Mondavi family. The other Mondavi family just bought all of Krug Champagne's holdings in France. So they went a totally different way. One way went sell out, take the money, make the cheap wine. The other one said, we're going to buy a 500-year-old institution and try to expand our portfolio. So the Mondavis probably control 60% of Cab in California, not just Napa, but they have their hand in Stag's Leap, they have their hand in Camus. So it's just fun. You think some of these places, you're like, oh, I'm getting this small production wine, but it's actually just the Mondavi family in one way or the other. Or Tommy Lasorda, the old Dodgers manager, owns a lot of vineyards out there. But there's a lot of young winemakers in Napa that are moving toward different grapes other than Cab, anticipating a climate shift. And they also want to get away from the expensive thing. The problem is the pushback is astounding. They don't have the overhead to break in. So we'll see what happens there. I think the future of Cab is in Texas, in America. A lot of people are growing Spanish grapes there, but there's some good Cabs coming out of there too. Or maybe just Washington State. Excellent Cabs from Washington State. Some of my favorite bottles come from Washington State, and they're only going to be getting better. So let's pour a little Josh here. Now, immediately you can see that's a lot darker than that Pinot. That's like a deep purple, smoke on the water, deep purple kind of thing going on there. And give it a sniff. Way more earthy, right? You can certainly get the fruit, but it's not that bright red fruit. It's not like underripe cherries. It's more of like a I wouldn't say blackberry, black cherry, maybe currant jelly, red or black currant jelly, if you ever deal with that. But it's much more jammy rather than bright. Less on the ripe side. I know it's like hard to say, but it's less tart. It's more like something you could, like a fruit you could spread, jelly rather than like picking it right off a bush or a tree. And you should be getting some grippiness from this. That's the tannins. Tannins are all the things in wine that aren't the juice. So it's like the skins of the grape, the stems, what we call mog, which is material other than grape, which is the pollen that's on grapes when it's crushed, sticks from the vineyard. Sometimes that can be like, bugs or birds that get mixed up in there. They get filtered out eventually, but leaves its imprint in the tannins. It's mostly just like the skins and things like that. So as wine gets older in the bottle, the tannins get softer. It gets less grippy. But a young wine. I'm drinking the Josh 21, and it's got a little bit of that tannic grip. Now people say, I'll get to this year's question in a little bit. People say, sometimes they think they get hangovers from the sulfites in wine. That's generally not true. There's less sulfites in a bottle of wine than there is in like 2 bites of an apple. If you are getting that from red wine, it means you have a higher allergy, or a lower allergy tolerance, I guess. You're more allergic to the pollen on them, or you are allergic to grapes simply, and shouldn't be drinking that. But sulfites are just a preservative. It's like the boogeyman in a lot of modern wines, but there are such low amounts. It doesn't really do much. And what they do to keep the wine fresh over time, especially if you're aging the wine, is if you're going to age the wine, it's essential. There's just no way around it. But you're more just allergic to the things in the bottle, or you've had too much wine, simply. I think people like to think, oh, I can't possibly be hungover. I only had this much wine. Like, no, you're just dehydrated. You're not allergic to the tannins. There's no sulfites. You don't need the sulfite wand for $30 or pouring the wine through a tissue to do it. It's just you're either allergic to it or you've had too much. So, there is a lot to enjoy. And, like I said, these wines aren't meant to be the greatest wines we've ever had. It's supposed to be about the process, really. So hopefully, we can say, now you have a little bit more of an idea. But let me take this question from Sharon. So years matter less now than they used to. It used to be that the vintage, which is the year, had a huge impact on the wine. It definitely does for smaller productions. Like I said, like how this year's Finger Lakes, like they lost all their red for this vintage. Well, the white is going to be different too, because although the white grapes survived, they were definitely affected by that cold. So it's going to be a little bit different. In Champagne, if you see a vintage, that's a really big thing, because Champagne is generally a blend of 3 different years of wines. So it usually says NV for non-vintage. If you see a vintage on a Champagne, that means like, get it if you can. That's a really good wine. Like specifically 2009 Champagne, like Dom Perignon 2009 is like probably the best, rated wine in the past century. 2009 was just a great year in Champagne. They had the perfect amount of rain and everything. There's a lot that you can do now where if you do get rain right before harvest, which you don't want because the grapes are engorged, you can do things to bring it back, make it more flavorful. It's just not, it's not what you're supposed to do. It's not the right way. It's not organic. Years definitely matter, especially in smaller productions. It matters a lot, but it matters less than it used to, because now we have technology to do a lot of things. Like when I was in Champagne, I went to Moet Chandon, and they have a giant machine that if they're not losing their money. They're getting their harvest no matter what, right? But if it's not up to their standards, they will manipulate it by adding water, oxygen, sugar to make it to where they want it, because they know what they like. obviously that's a huge, the biggest production in the world. So they can do it a little bit more differently than other places. But Finger Lakes, definitely vintage affects it. Napa, not so much by the weather, but by external factors. But a lot of places can kind of funk around with it now. But I mean, like if you find like a very old bottle though, and someone's like, oh, we have this 72, Stag's Leap, 76 Stag's Leap, let's say the first red wine to ever beat a French red wine in competition. Stag's Leap, Artemis, 1976. That's something that that's going to matter then, because back then things were so different. Everything was done by hand, But once we hit 2013, let's say, that's when kind of it matters less. Organic wines they have to be your thing. They will often have that barnyard, I describe smell. Some of them literally just smell like sulfur at first till they air out a little bit. They're certainly better for the environment, I guess, but they often don't taste as good, and they're really, really expensive. So that's the trade-off there. And organic means different in every country, every state, every growing region. They have different standards for what makes an organic wine. The reserve. The reserve is usually just if they found a particular part of that harvest that seemed like better grapes from a certain area. That's the reserve part. It might say single block too. Single block and reserve are pretty much interchangeable, not entirely, but for the most part, you can just interchange those. And it depends. I think the Mondavi, the Robert Mondavi Reserve, is definitely better than the regular Robert Mondavi usually. If you're looking for it's a Friday night, hey, let's spend $22 instead of 15 and get the Mondavi Reserve. Yeah, that'll be better. But it's just it's like the classic lawyer answer. It depends, right? It's all about the amount of times I've had to say that to a person. Oh yeah, well, it depends.
What I noticed was that there were the reserves were even from different places. Like I found I found the reserve first at like Sam's Club, and it was some fancy label, and I didn't really notice much of it. And then I had been Hannaford. They sell wine in our grocery stores here, so they had the regular just Cabernet Sauvignon. So I'm like, okay, so it's there. And then I was at more of like a liquor store that we have up here and they had, I think, 4 different types of reserves for Josh Capsule. One was from I think it might even said North Coast. It was obviously different areas that they were from. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is there, but that's what I was thinking, is maybe it was a smaller area as far as where the grapes were coming from or something.
Yeah, it's definitely the smaller area part. It's a lot of marketing too.
Yeah.
So they can, build oh yeah, we're, this is different. It's more expensive, therefore it's better. And it's really just different.
The other thing is you were talking about the chalky, like the grip.
Yeah.
I was at the old Westminster Winery, which anybody who knows is down from that area and around Gettysburg. It's Westminster, Maryland. My brother lives in Hampstead. And we had a wine that they actually described it as being chalky. And we're like, what does that mean? And then we drank it, and it actually was chalky in your mouth.
It dried you right up.
I don't know if that was good or not, but what was that did that? I think it was a red, if I remember correctly. It was a few years.
Generally the age of it. So
my husband just said it was a white. I'm sorry, it was a white.
Oh, so white. Yeah, I mean that means it's a young wine, and it probably had, at least for white, pretty thick skins on the grapes.
Mm-hmm.
So then a lot, the skins are thicker, and they have more stuff on them too, more pollen.
Is that something that people look for normally? Again, it was really kind of one of those, we drank it because I think they're my brother and they were part of the club or something, right? So it was not necessarily something we paid for, but we were kind of.
I wouldn't say, especially in a white, I wouldn't say it's a desirable feature, but sometimes people like out of the ordinary things.
Yeah.
Weird things.
It is a conversation starter, I guess. So good. Thank you.
Yeah. And the different price range for each types of wine just depends on how hard it is to grow. So certain wines need more water or more, especially time to age. So if you have a wine that you need to put in a barrel for 3 years before you release it, then you have to charge more for it to cover your overhead for those years. So white wine doesn't really get aged, so that's cheaper. And then red wine is going to be more expensive because it's harder to grow and longer to age. Yeah, bourbon oak barrel is just like a thing. It's like a new thing that people are trying. You're supposed to use virgin oak barrel, so something that nothing's been in before. And the bourbon oak is mostly a marketing thing. A lot of people who drink Napa cabs also drink bourbon, especially like steakhouse people, right? They go to the steakhouse, they want the Camus and they want the Woodford Reserve. So somebody said, hey, let's put both together and sell it at a really good price. And whoever did that is probably in the C-suite somewhere now because it worked. Not the best wine, but they sell the hell out of it. All right. Any last questions, folks? I think I had an hour, right, Joe? I think I went over by a little bit, but 10 minutes isn't bad for me.
Thanks so much, Bryan, for sharing everything with us tonight and telling us about the 4 different types of wine. And you said Bottles with Berries, your Instagram
Yes.
handle. So anyone who wants to check that out, of course, do that. And thanks everyone for coming, spending some time with us tonight. And thanks again, Bryan, for all of your time and sharing this wisdom with us.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. I really enjoyed doing this. So thank you for joining me, especially on a Monday in the winter where things can be dragging. I hope I brought a little joy to your day, especially where here it's still snow everywhere and frozen on the top now. And I'm ready for the winter to be over already. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night and happy Wine Monday, excuse me.